Here we go. Episode 28 of the Lucas Grandsire podcast. I don't need to keep saying it, but I'm going to keep saying it. It's the podcast, the most creative name in the business for the most creative guy in the business. Very excited about our guest today. I don't even know where to start in the intro. MMA fighter, writer. I'm seeing you're an analyst as well. I feel like you do everything in this industry, but it is, of course, Jillian DeCoursey. What's going on? Thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me on. Yeah, I mean, it's kind of just developed into kind of getting involved in all different aspects recently.
Here, let me see. Yeah, I mean, it's funny because it's like you're looking at the intro, and then, I mean, I see that you're writing. I see that you're analyzing the fights. I mean, it looks like you're doing everything pretty much. Fighter as well. Like, is there one that we can pin you down, or is it just are you kind of everything in this industry?
I mean, I'm more of a fighter. The other ones are just kind of like they just kind of happen through quarantine and trying to stay active and keep my name out there. And I'm not like the best at like promoting myself and like kind of like talking crap and all that kind of stuff. So this was like an interesting way of trying to keep my, my name in the mix during some downtime.
It seems like it was effective though, because I'm seeing like you have a lot of engagement on Twitter. It seems like a lot of people value your opinions and stuff like that. It seems like it was a great way to market yourself.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't initially think it was gonna like take off that way, but now it's like it's really become something pretty cool. A cool way to engage with fans and just kind of stay active. And I'm always watching fights anyway, so it's like, hey, why don't we add this in?
Speaking of watching fights, I wasn't able to watch it, but I did wake up to chaos on Twitter about, a fighter losing his finger out there. Everyone was trying to
Jeez.
figure out, is it under the cage? I mean, were you watching that one live?
Oh yeah, I was watching that one. That was, oh my God, that was nuts.
Oh man, I'm looking through the tweets and people are like, and I'm seeing the timeline happen where they're like, oh, they've asked the fans to start looking under the cage. There, it's in the glove. I'm sitting there, I'm thinking like, what is going on? Like, what is this?
It was so confusing. You know what it turned out to be, right?
It was in the glove, right? I heard he got
Yeah,
kicked
yeah.
and then yeah, I got stuck in the glove grappling, I believe.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I've had like an experience with the actual those like type of gloves, the cage fury gloves. My first fight with them, the first round, my hand was actually out of my glove, like two of the fingers for most of the round. But I thought it was just because hey, my hands were small and those gloves are a little bit big on me. But I guess it's something going on there.
That's
I'm
that
glad my
sounds
fingers stayed intact though.
right. Yeah, that was disgusting. I mean, it just the way, it's like it's one thing people were losing the fingers, but when people started getting specific about it, I was like, nah, you guys like, I
Ugh.
love fighting and all that stuff, but you gotta chill. Like that's disgusting.
Yeah, no, I get grossed out by that kind of stuff. I get all like, ugh.
Yeah. But so would you say that, since you fought in those gloves, do you think there really is a problem with the gloves at that point? Like, is it safe to say? Because I saw some people speculating, but you've had experience with it.
I mean, well, like I mean, if we think of like how many fights like that they've had, and this is the first time where someone like kind of lost a finger. All right, odds are in the favor that it's not a common thing. But anytime it's like it's touch and go because those gloves do I feel favor a grappler because the ones that have like those that extra bars in your palm, so they keep your hand on your glove in the hand better, but um hand in the glove better, but at the same time you can't grapple as well because it keeps you can't close your hand as much. So it's like touch and go. It's you're always going to have people that are going to prefer one type over another, and you kind of just go, you got to go with what you get at that night.
If I was doing my best Joe Rogan impression, I would start talking about Trevor Whitman and how he's got the solution. Jamie pulled that up. We saw it on the podcast, but yeah, I'm not Joe Rogan. I don't have a jalapeno CBD drink or what. It's super crazy thing. But I mean, what's the solution glove wise? Because you're someone that trains with them, competes with them. Like, what? I mean, is there truly a glove that would be best?
I mean, people say like, oh, now there's the finger pokes that have been happening so much more often, but I mean, whatever you do, it's gonna, favor. All right, this glove will favor a striker. This glove will favor a grappler. This glove is safer, but I feel like there's really not like a one set solution, because there's always gonna be some, form of a fighter that isn't happy with the type of glove.
That's the thing, right? We saw some people that are like, "Oh, we want the pride glove where your hands naturally curl," but then people are like,
Yeah.
"All right, so what about grappling
I
though?" Because
mean,
they're
yeah,
like,
you're gonna
people
be
have
like,
to,
oh, yeah, you're gonna
yeah.
be like, what is that?
I mean, yeah, it's like, or I mean, what's the solution? Is it to go bare knuckle where everybody has a million cuts, you lose all your knuckles by the time you're 30? Like, I mean, what's the solution?
Right. I mean, one, I guess, would be don't illegally grab your gloves, right? That's that's one point
That's
of it.
fair. That's fair.
um, but I mean, it's gonna happen. People are always gonna try and find little tricks that they can do, like slide. Unfortunately, it's part of the sport. Um, I personally really just despise glove grabbing. I think it's a real punk move, but it happens.
What's like something behind the scenes that people watching at home, like it's like the fighters do to gain an advantage that maybe we don't catch it? You know what I mean? Sometimes you hear people are real slick about pulling hair and stuff like that. Is there something that we're missing at home that you realize happening in the fight?
I mean, I haven't really had like real like experiences like that. The worst thing that I've had somebody do is continually like grab the cage to stop takedowns.
Yeah.
Um, and that's annoying. But it's like, all right, it doesn't necessarily you're not putting damage on me, but you are like, you are changing the pace of the fight. Um, I mean, I think it really just depends, like on different fighters. There are fighters that just tend to try and always find like those little loopholes. Like, oh, all right, if I'm inside and I'm grabbing the glove, nobody can see that. I mean, that
Yeah.
is a common thing that happens, especially when you're going for like chokes and things, and you're underneath the person. Nobody's gonna know if you're grabbing that glove.
Yeah, that's, I mean, it's scary when, or like, Tanner Bozer was talking about some of the stuff his training partners would do in training. He was like, I had to trim my beard 'cause he was like, guys were pulling my beard to get out of submissions. He was like, people were, wrapping their hands in the hair, like, and training. If you're gonna act like an idiot, that would be the place to do it, right? Not when you're out there in the cage.
Right. I mean, one thing that girls do tend to do is, I mean, not tend to do, but there have been ones that I've known that have done this. Luckily, no one I fought, but like they'll like do different things like with their hair braiding, because it can get really coarse, especially if you add like lots of hairspray and things, and you can use it to kind of cut your
Oh.
opponent as you're like grappling and grinding them, against the cage.
Wow, that's super interesting. 'Cause I think that's something like people see the braids. I don't think people realize that. Like, man, when it
Yeah.
comes to getting advantages, that's a crazy thing. The hairspray. I didn't even think about something like that. I know we talk about greasing, but hairspray to get cuts, if you think
Yeah.
about it, it does make sense.
Yeah, because we do, like you when you get your hair braid, like if you get it really tight,
Yeah.
it's it's like a rock.
Yeah. I mean, I say that not having a lot of hair, but I would assume looking at people that have more hair that can
Yeah,
have braids, like, yeah, you would want to get that thing tight.
yeah. Like I mean, I more braid my hair like to make it look cool and
Yeah.
like but like my last fight, I had like put like extra color hair in my braids, and they were like checking it out and like, oh well, if it was here, we would have to take you would have to take it out, because it's like it can be like a weapon. And I was like,
Yeah.
that wasn't my intent. It just matched my outfit.
Yeah, exactly. I'm trying to look cool, and you're trying to make me out to be someone that's cheating. It's like it's just
Yeah.
green or blue or whatever it is. Like it's not that deep.
I was like, it matches.
But so, what's like the best hairstyle? Because I think like we've seen different fighters, men and women, obviously. But like Benson Henderson, his hairstyle is leave it out there and do this the
I
entire
yeah,
fight.
I don't understand that.
So what is it like? I mean, it like a ponytail. I feel like obviously someone that doesn't have a ponytail, but I feel like it would start to have strands coming out that would bother you, right? Like, is
Right.
the cornrows, the braids, is that really like the best thing for you?
In my opinion, that's the best. And I don't even like some of the girls like will braid their hair into like a ponytail.
Yeah,
For me, I'm like, I need it straight flat back. Especially because I'm more of a grappler, and I find that that ponytail kind of gets in the way when you're trying to like sneak out, and it just like little tiny things can totally like change the game. So for me, it's like straight back braids.
so if you were to do them too tight, right, and that starts pulling on your skin, would that lead to more cuts? Like, would you be more prone since your skin is tighter in that situation?
I mean, potentially, I would think so, right? Because like we look like aliens sometimes after we get our hair braided. Like your eyes are popping out, and you're like, all
Yeah.
right.
Or I had Max Griffin where he was showing me his hairstyle for the fight, and he shows me and he goes, "Bro, this is so tight." He was like, "It hurts," and you could see like where it was pulling on his skin.
Yeah.
I mean, wouldn't it be distracting though? You go out there and you have your hair that tight, like it might look cool, but I feel like you've got so much to think about. You really want your head like throbbing on top of it.
Yeah, I mean, like, I haven't really had that experience. Like, I usually get my hair braided like the night before, so there's time for it to kind of like settle in.
Right.
And most of the, most of the people I go to anyway, they know they're braiding it for a fight, so it's like, they're not trying to make it where it's like gonna hurt.
Yeah, that does make sense. While we talk about cheating though, or cheating, whatever, illegal stuff. We saw Bilal Muhammad and Leon Edwards go out there, the big eye poke, all that stuff.
Yep.
How did you feel about Nate Diaz getting that fight against Leon Edwards? Like, how did you feel about that whole situation? I feel like everyone had an opinion on it, but what was your take on it?
I mean, I think it's just, hey, he's like, going on opportunity. It is what it is. It's part of the game. Sometimes things have like unfortunate endings, like an eye poke or, an injury. They happen. And, you got to just move on with it. And people are going to take opportunities. So take it.
So for you as a fighter, you were cool with Bilal. Well, I guess I shouldn't word it like that, but basically, Leon not fighting Bilal a second time. It seems like that's what people wanted. Like that seemed like kind of the fair thing to do in that situation.
You know how it goes. It's like, it's not
Yeah.
always what's fair that happens or like what we think should happen. It's who, what fights are going to bring the money, and who's asking for it at the time.
I know Leon went on Joe Rogan's podcast, and I thought it was interesting because they got in a mini debate a little bit where they were talking about should Bilal get that rematch. And I really like that Leon, stuck to his guns because sometimes it
Right.
can be tough on a big platform. But he was like, listen, that's not the big fight for my career. That's not what's going to give me the title shot. I mean, I appreciated
Right.
the honesty because, as much as we all like Bilal, he's got a great Twitter game and, a great fighter as well. But
Right.
it's like, yeah, that's not necessarily the fight that's probably going to get you the notoriety. And especially in this situation with Nate Diaz, that you would want in that
Right.
situation.
Right. And, I think a lot of fighters, are really kind of thinking of like, trying to think of like their big game picture. Right. Because at the end of the day, it is a business. And, people have to do what they need to do. That's going to be in their best interest. And that's not necessarily what fans are going to like, but, fighters do have to look out for themselves. Right. And for their families and, how are they going to, do what they need to do to provide for their families.
I do have to say though, I saw a lot of criticism, like how does this make sense and stuff. I kind of like it. I love the circus stuff. I'm not talking
Right.
Gracie Shamrock at 60, but like this is the kind of fun fight where nobody's champion. You're not going to hold up the division. Like I don't know, I like it. And if Nate Diaz wins, you could argue he could get a title shot. I mean, it'd be kind of weird, but like he'd have a small case for it.
Right.
Leon, it's a win, gets him back where he needs to be. Like I don't know, it's a fun fight, and I like that. It really doesn't hold up the division if you think about it.
Right. Right, exactly. And it's not always what we think makes sense that they
Yeah.
make happen, right?
I mean, what is it? If it makes dollars, it makes sense, right? And this one, as a co-main event, 5 rounder too, weirdness on top of weirdness. Like,
Right.
I don't know. I mean, I wrote a whole article on how I liked it, and even my editor kind of added like, hot take or bombs because it was kind of like,
Right.
Lucas is cheering for this fight that everybody hates, but I like it. I like the weirdness in the MMA game.
Yeah, and people are gonna tune in. So at the end of the day, that's what matters.
For sure. For you as an analyst, you look at this fight real quick without studying tape or anything. If you had to sort of pick how the fight goes, how it looks, like what's kind of the early prediction or the early like analysis for this one?
I mean, I think Diaz is gonna do what he does. Kind of like a little awkward like striking style, just come out hard and then get into the ground and kind of dominate there.
So you like Nate Diaz in this fight?
I mean, I don't like him like personality wise, but I've come to like respect him like over time, because he just says and does what he needs to do. But then he also kind of, he puts his money where his mouth is. And I really respect his grappling game.
For sure, and I think I think, if people that followed Diaz knew about the jiu-jitsu and all that stuff, right, that wasn't a surprise. And then he
Right.
submitted McGregor, and people all of a sudden were like, wow, the boxer can. It's like, hold
Yeah.
on, hold on, hold on. It's not the
No,
boxer.
yeah.
It's like jiu-jitsu and boxing. Obviously, he's a very good
Right.
boxer, but he's got both. You know what I mean? It's not a surprise. Like Connor, the big joke was, oh, so you're a wrestler now.
Right.
That's a surprise. But Nate Diaz does need more respect on the ground because he's got the iconic middle finger submission and all that stuff. So he's definitely had
Right.
those moments on the ground.
Yeah, I think I respect his ground game a lot. He's a he's very skilled on the ground that I don't think he gets enough credit for sometimes.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think what it is that his wrestling isn't very good. Like I think the fight against RDA kind of showed us where his
Right.
wrestling was, and I think a lot of people saw that and figured, okay, your ass on the ground, stick to striking. But he's had enough moments where it's like there's different levels to this game as you're
Right.
watching it. Like there's so many elements. You could be good on the ground, but still have weaknesses in other areas.
Right. Right. Absolutely. It's because there's always that middle part of the game, right? Where we have the striking, we have the grappling, but then there's all that time that's in between where you're not striking and you're not grappling at the same time. And it's like the people that can find that place in that middle ground, those are the ones that are, really next level.
So with that being said, if someone came to you, or I'm sure they have, or your DMs must be filled with, amateur MMA fighters that are never going to go pro, but what would be like the best base to start? Like, I think for some people looking at it, you think maybe kickboxing and a mixture of wrestling, something like that. But if you had to recommend someone, you're starting out from scratch, like what would be kind of the best sort of base to sort of start off with?
I mean, I feel like I'm biased in this question, but I would say working like the ground game, because in my opinion, I feel like that's the hardest piece to develop to a high level. I feel like the time that it takes just to learn like not even like not basic level jujitsu, but like really like how to make how to really be good on the ground. It takes so much time. So just in the time factor, I would recommend starting with like jujitsu or like a ground piece, and then filling everything in.
I think the interesting thing was I talked to Curtis Blades when he was coming off the Justin Willis fight, with the famous big titties, go home, all that fun stuff. But we were talking about Justin's ground game, and something interesting that Curtis said was he was like, to get to my level of wrestling, you don't get that by training. He was like, you
Right,
have to be in the collegiate like wrestling programs. He's like, if you don't go through the high school, college programs, wrestling's like you can't get to my level. But it kind of feels like if you look at some of these guys, like wrestling at that kind of level isn't for everybody. So you sort of look at it like you're at a disadvantage if you can't get into one of these programs.
right, right. Or if it's just not because not everybody starts doing like a combat sport.
Yeah.
From the time they're a little kid. Especially with wrestling. Geographically, that plays a huge role. Like for example, I grew up in Queens, in New York, and we didn't within the city. Wrestling really wasn't something that existed. All right, if you go out onto Long Island, it's huge out on the islands, but geographically, you're going to have a big, there's a big difference there. All right, boxing and things like that are a lot bigger within the city, but you're not getting, most of the time, wrestling programs are smaller, more condensed within the city. So I think that plays a factor in things as well.
And you mentioned geographically, and yours was very specific. Like you're looking at it within New York State, but even if you look at it more globally, right? A lot of
Hmm.
people was like, you need to go to America to learn how to wrestle, right? Like if you're in England, if you're in Europe, especially a place like France, stuff like that,
Right,
they're like, you're just not going to learn how to wrestle. And a lot of these guys, they come in and people are like, oh, you're a kickboxer because you're from out there. But
right,
then you have someone like a Leon Edwards that comes in and shows people, like, look, I have a good ground game, or someone that
right,
flew under the radar when he was on The Ultimate Fighter, Saul Rogers, coming from England. He showed up and he was grounding and pounding everybody, taking them to the ground. And everybody was like, hold on, wait a minute. Like, you're English. You shouldn't have a good wrestling base.
right.
But so, I mean, is that the solution? Like, come over to America, or have we reached that point where we can, outside of the country, people can have that high level?
I think it depends on the individual, right? Because some people need to be like surrounded by, the elite in that sport. Other people can just, drill and like just learn from, more like a distance. I mean, like, all right, I have a good training partner. I know, hey, these are the drills we need to do. I can just drill them out and they excel. So I think it's a very individualized thing of what people need.
One thing I want to get your take on, because I know you're big into women's MMA, obviously, which makes sense because that's how you compete. But we saw two fighters get called up to the UFC yesterday with Lupita Godinez from LFA, and I believe she was the
Yep.
LFA champion as well. And then Erin Blanchfield was one of those
Yep.
prospects. Like, if you've been paying attention, people have been talking about her since the start. How did you feel about those two signings? I mean, did you like them? Did you think it was too soon? Maybe even too
No,
late? How'd you like them?
I mean, Erin, I cross train with Erin sometimes. She comes out and spars with us over in Long Island MMA. And I mean, she's been waiting. I think she's someone that is very deserving of the shot. I think she's ready for it. She's fighting up a little bit in weight, but you know what? With those calls, you just got to take the opportunity that you get. And I think she's gonna do well. She's kind of been she's been supposed to having multiple fights, in the last couple of months, and they kept falling through. So she was really just kind of waiting for, either a fight to come through, or to get that call. So that one I'm pretty excited about. Um, and I think it's just right now, especially like since like kind of COVID really came down, you're seeing a lot of females getting that bump like really quickly. Some that I'm like, yeah, I think really 100% deserve it, and other ones it's like, ooh, is that too soon for them? But I mean, at that point, you don't have a choice. You don't get to make that
Yeah,
choice. It's,
yeah.
hey, you take this opportunity or you lose it. So, and I think with those, especially with the short notice call ups, I don't think they have anything to lose, because even if the fight doesn't go the way that they want it to, um, they still got the call. They're still in the UFC. So you know what? Then that next fight, or the pressure's on if they wind up losing that debut, to pick it up that next fight. But um, they're there. So now you got to do what you got to do.
But it seems good, like, for your standing with the UFC too, because it feels like they like when you take stuff on short notice, right?
Right.
Obviously, they know you want to get signed, but they look at it favorably, like, hey, you stepped up when maybe nobody else did, or whatever the situation. But it seems like just being willing to step up, and in Aaron's case, 125 or taking on someone who competed at 145 against 6 foot Megan Anderson. Like, you look at that, and it's like that's got to have some kind of favor with the UFC.
Right, absolutely. And she's, like I said, I think she's gonna do well. Just the way her style is. And I don't think like the bright lights of the UFC are gonna affect her too much. It's just obviously, the size it can always be a factor.
Right, and I think for her too, like, you sort of knew, like, the UFC was gonna happen, right? You know what I mean?
Mhm.
Like, you get to Invicta, and a lot of people, but you know why you're in Invicta. It's to build yourself up to get to
Right.
the UFC, just like you do with the LFA. And I think for her, I think the one that put her on the radar was the big head kick knockout. I can't for the life of me remember her opponent's name, but if I saw it, I'd know it.
That
But
was Valerie, right?
I, yeah, I completely, like I said, if I saw it written, I'd be
Yeah.
like, yes, for sure, it's that. But off the top of my head, it's like, I can't for the life of me remember it.
Yeah, we fought actually. I fought on that card with her when she got the head kick.
Oh, yeah, so that's the one where no matter what
Yeah.
you did, like, people were gonna talk about that head kick. It was
Yep.
like, "Yeah, but I did stuff." It's like, "Yeah, but did you get the
No,
head kick?"
yeah,
Like, that
exactly.
it's a tough card. But I think that was the thing for her too, right? Everybody was like, "Oh, jujitsu, jujitsu, jujitsu," and then she knocks her out with a head kick, and she's
Yep.
like, "Well, how's that for jujitsu? How'd you like that one?"
And I love that because I always get pegged as like the grappler, and then sometimes you're like, well, no, I'm a fighter. Like we
Yeah.
we we do it all, and we train it all. We just have areas that you're just gonna like gravitate towards.
Exactly. Because that's the thing. I think people look at fighters and they're like a Francis Ngannou is a good example where people almost think like he doesn't want to wrestle or he doesn't like
Right,
training it or whatever it is. I'm sure he's busting his ass in there, but at the end of the day, like when you have two bricks for hands, like naturally you're gonna want to stand on the feet and he's granted
right,
chin, like that's what he's gonna gravitate towards. I think people would be disappointed if he was double legging guys and just staying on top of him the whole fight.
right, exactly. You
But
because
so
people, you tune into certain fighters for a specific reason.
or it's like we talk about Nate Diaz, right? Where everybody's thinking of him as the boxer that stands across the cage with an incredibly long reach.
Right.
Where it's like, he does more things in his game, but is there an advantage to that? Like people go into your fight and they think you're a grappler, but maybe you have a plan for him on the feet. Like, does that bring any kind of advantage?
I think so. I mean, like when I first turned pro, I was really I guess like in my own head about like, no, I'm gonna show people that I'm not just a grappler. And sometimes it worked out well, and then other times it worked against me because I was forcing myself not to use my strength. And then slowly it got to the point where it was like, no, like, hey, you're really good at this aspect of the game. We need to accentuate that and make that our game plan.
And so for the game plan thing, like I hear a lot of fighters, like obviously you're gonna have cliche answer during interviews because you can't give it away, but it's like
Right.
some guys are like, I'm just gonna focus on my game or blah blah blah. But like, what's the truth behind that? Like when you guys are preparing, I assume there's got to be a part where it's like I got to do what I'm best at to beat this guy. But I'm sure you're also preparing for them too when you're looking at the matchup. Like I hear a lot
Right.
of fighters like I'm not focusing on them, but I feel like you have to focus on them, right? It'd be kind of I feel like for a lot of guys, it'd be silly not to focus on your opponent at all.
I mean, I think there's a mix with that because I know certain fighters that they don't watch the tape on their opponent at all. Like their coaches will, and they
Yeah.
leave it to that side of it. I'm someone that I want to watch it myself because
Yeah.
I want to see what your tendencies are. I want to, at least like kind of know, all right, you tend to do this. But at the end of the day, like sometimes what somebody did for like 5 fights before you, then they come to the fight with you and they're doing something completely different. And you're like, well, I just spent, 2 months planning for
Yeah.
this and now you're not doing it. So that's where the disadvantage can come if you're like really focused on like what they're doing. um for me, I think it's a mix. Like I'm like, all right, I need to do X, Y, and Z, and that's what I need to focus on, and I need to get really good at doing this. And then if they change it up, it doesn't matter because you know what, I'm doing X, Y, and Z.
It's funny because I talked to I think his name's Mike Davis. He's got such like a regular name that sometimes you want to add a Smith or something in there. But we were talking about his fight with Mason Jones, and he's like, "Oh, I don't know my opponent's name. I haven't watched tape. I don't even know what he looks like." He's like, "I'm gonna get in the cage, and whoever the guy is that's supposed to fight me, I'm gonna kick his ass." But I feel like for fighting is so stressful and stuff. Wouldn't that be extra terrifying? Like not knowing who's gonna be there and just I know you believe in yourself and stuff, but there's a part of it where you look at it like as someone that likes to be prepared, like that seems like it'd be pretty terrifying. Just show up and do the thing.
um I mean, I guess it depends on like how you look at it. Like for me, for grappling, that's how I view it. I'm like, whatever. If I'm gonna do a grappling match, I'm gonna do a super fight. It doesn't matter. I'm just gonna, go and do it. For fights, I guess it's a little bit different because there's a little bit more like at stake. Like, someone's trying to like punch you in the face, so it kind of changes things a little bit. Um, but at the end of the day, it's like it's what we're there to do, right? And if you're used to like sparring training with different people, then you know what? It's like you get different looks in the gym. So come fight night, all right, you got to do what you got to do. It really doesn't matter who's across the cage. It's up to you to handle your business.
So for you, what's kind of your status right now in your career? Because I know you tend to alternate from, I believe it's CFFC and Invicta, and we see
Yep.
you in both. I believe you fought for the title back in December. You mentioned a lot of people getting called up by the UFC. Like, what's kind of your status? Are you one of these fighters that like you're eyeing the UFC, like you need to be on standby? Like, what's kind of your position right now in your career?
I mean, for me, I'm like a natural atom weight. My last fight, I did fight a straw weight, but I didn't cut any weight to make straw weight. I pretty much like, I was like eating like cookies and like ice cream the weekend before the fight, like just to, for me, it was more like I was like, well, wait, I want to have a, I don't want to get too low. I want to so,
Yeah.
it was the opposite problem. And I mean, the fight obviously didn't go the way I wanted it to go because I didn't get my hand raised at the end of the night. But I did feel like the size difference in the cage. And she wasn't even a big 115er. So it was kind of like it was like an eye-opening type thing of like, hey, no, you really are an atom weight. So for right now, atom weight in the UFC is not an option. So right now it's like, hey, you know what? This is where I'm at. Between Invicta and CFFC, and potentially, maybe fight, getting a fight like in another bigger show. But right now, for me, UFC isn't even an option.
That puts you in a tricky spot, right? Because we know a lot of fight, and I've talked to a lot of fighters, and a lot of them are like, "I'm not even interested in Bellator." I mean, which is crazy to me, but it puts you in a tricky spot, right? Because a lot of people they eye the UFC, and in your case, it's just that it's like it's really tough to go out there in a different weight class,
Right.
especially considering you didn't even have to cut weight, which is pretty crazy. Like that's got to be real tough for you to sort of look back on.
Right. Yeah, and I mean, it's just it is what it is right now. And I don't really understand why like atom weights aren't, part of the UFC roster, but that is what it is. They I think like they have like certain weight classes like 145 for example where they don't even have enough people in
Yeah.
there to actually make like fights that make sense. But yet at 105 the talent pool is really deep. If you watch 105 fights in Invicta, in for Rising, all those things, like those fights are exciting. And there's like a lot of females in that weight class where it's like, hey, wait, it could make sense, but for them, for whatever reason, right now, it's just not, it's not on there. It's not the cards aren't in the deck. So
It's funny because I'm seeing more of a push where people are like, listen, you have a lot of straw weights that aren't real straw weights, right? Like
right,
a Jin Fry obviously is a big signing, and everybody's like, listen, I mean, she's fighting above a weight class. Like
yep,
you can see the size difference. There's a big push for Michelle Waterson to cut weight. We have heard her say she's not sure she wants to drop back down,
right,
but kind of like a Valentina situation where she said she didn't want to, but she did it anyways.
right,
So that could be a big name in the division. Like it seems, obviously, you see the mess at 145, if you want to call it that. But
right,
I feel like you mentioned, there's a ton of talent there. Sign a bunch of people from Invicta as well. Like you'd have a real legit division out there.
right. Yeah, I mean, I'm not just saying that because I am an atom weight.
No, right? Yeah.
Like just even from like a fan perspective, I think it would be a big draw, but it's just in the position we're at as fighters, we have to do what we need to do, and go where we're gonna get fights.
So what's the goal for your career at this point? Is it about, going wherever you can, collecting as many belts? Like, do you have sort of an idea, with the UFC obviously not being an option, like, do you have an idea of what you'd still like to accomplish in your career?
I mean, I just want to get like as many fights in as possible, get as many W's, and you know, keep fighting and enjoying it. For me, it's more about, this is something I really love to do, and I don't have like necessarily an end goal. If I win, I want, obviously, we all want to win titles, win belts, and get to the top of the division, which I think is right within my reach. A couple wins away. But for me, it's more just loving what I do.
So can we expect to see you with an MMA junkie and MMA fighting at some point? Like, is that in the cards? Like, they're looking for people. You're writing. Like, is that
So,
is that realistic for you at all?
I mean, I haven't really thought much into like the extent that like my writing and like my like little Twitter and fight analysis will go. I'm really just kind of doing it right now. Is like, hey, this is a fun thing to do. Let's just do it. And then, I mean, if it goes somewhere, it goes somewhere.
Did that give you a new perspective on the media? Because I feel like there's a lot of like fighters against media, and in reality, it's like if some people understood the role of each other better, things could, like, there'd be a people, like, you could use fighters can use the media. The media obviously uses fighters for content, but did that give you sort of a new understanding, a new perspective of the media when you started doing that?
Yeah, I mean, I guess in the way of a sense of like it, like I guess it like strengthened my connections within like the media, because hey, wait, we're interacting more. Um, but it's also they need to write stories that people are going to want to read and click, right? And if it sucks, it's a crappy part of
Yeah.
the sport. But if you wind up getting like knocked out, or like you just something like off the wall happens to you in a fight, it's gonna be memed. It's gonna be written about, right? It's the way it is, and there's really not any avoiding it. So it's like, all right, you can't really be mad about it. It's like it's part of the game.
The one thing you did mention that I struggle with, it's the memes. Like, you know what I mean? Like, now you feel like every fighter gets meme, like Stipe. Like, how many times are we gonna see him falling off a skateboard or something? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I feel like it's sort of, I mean, yes, we're in a meme culture, but it takes away from it a little bit, right? Like, you almost feel like if you get knocked out, you're hearing more and more guys say like, "I'm worried about the memes more than the fact
Yeah.
that you just got a concussion out there." Like, that's so crazy to me.
No, 100%, because what memes go viral like this, right?
Yeah.
And they're, I mean, it's again, it's a, hey, this is the world we're living in. This is the way our like social culture is, and it's just something that we just got to deal with, because it's not going to stop.
Yeah, yeah, it's only gonna get worse at this point. Like
Yeah.
when you see pages with millions of followers, and they've got a picture of Stipe getting memed, you're like, what? Like, is it like this is not how I want people to discover the UFC with Stipe, going down a slide or something. You know what I mean? Like they put some respect. Like people are calling him
Right.
the goat at heavyweight. Like it just, but I mean, yeah, if it draws eyeballs, I guess.
Yep, yep, and I mean that's what it comes down to. And then it's, then there's the people that view it as like there's no such thing as like bad publicity, right?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think it's all just perspective and how you can kind of handle it. And, anytime you're in the spotlight, whether you're, an actor or something like that, there's going to be good and bad sides to it.
So one thing I like to talk about on this show when we have fighters and stuff like that, sort of their experience with the media, doing the interviews and stuff. Because you're fighting, on smaller promotions like Invicta and stuff, you're gonna do a wider range of interviews. I think in the UFC you reach a point where you can say like, I only want ESPN and TMZ,
Right.
but smaller ones, it's like, you're gonna talk to the website you've never heard of, where they've got like a weird technique like flyingheadkick.com or something like that. Well, I mean, do you tend to do a lot of those interviews where sort of you finish it and you're like, maybe I shouldn't have done that because that was awful.
I mean, it's touch and go, right? Like, I mean, like it's one of those things where it's like, hey, if you want to put your name out there, you interact with different people. And yeah, of course, I've done interviews where I'm like, what the heck just happened there? I'm like, but you just go through it, right? I mean, but for the most part, especially now, like, just having like a better sense of, hey, okay, you know what? Yeah, like let's do this interview. I try and like as best as I can like navigate my way through where it's not ones where I'm like, can I go like hide in the corner?
What's like, can you pinpoint, like, is there one that stands out as, like, the worst ever? Like, as soon as you hung up the phone, Skype, whatever, you were like, "If that guy ever reaches out to me again, he's getting blocked." Like, has there been that kind of interview?
I mean, there definitely has been. It hasn't been for a while though. I would say like more towards like the beginning of my career when it was like pretty much like, hey, if anybody reached out for like an interview, it was like, all right, yeah,
Yeah.
let's do it. Now, definitely more particular, especially with doing interviews, more just because I'm like, you know what, I don't want to like waste my time.
Yeah.
That's really what it comes down to. It's like, I don't mind doing them at all, but if you're gonna just ask me ridiculous questions or, kind of be like a hood rat in the interview, I'm not interested.
I was watching one interview, and obviously I don't want to say who it is, but like the guy on there, his question lasted like a very long time to the point where I'm watching it. I forgot, so I'm like, I forgot the question. I'm like, so I can't even imagine what's going through the fighter's mind. But it was just like, and he was baiting him to call people out and stuff. And I'm watching it. It's like as a fighter, and the fighter was very good about it, stayed diplomatic and stuff. But I'm
Right,
thinking like, how bad is that for you, and even for the fighter, because you put him in a very awkward spot where it's like you ask guys, who do you want next? And it's like, oh, whoever they give me. All right, I'm not going to press you because I understand what
right,
that means. And then you have other guys like, who do you want? And they look right in the camera and they, start naming people's family members. But I feel like there is some interviews like that where you get baited in the stuff or you do things and then you sort of look at it and it's like, it's an unfortunate situation for the writer because, he's going to look bad in the future, but for the
right.
fighter as well, because they have to sit through that. And then, maybe they don't look good because of the way it went and it's not their fault.
Right, right. Yeah, 100%. And I mean, it's just like I said, like learning, right? Like, hey, learning, like, all right, which interviews to try and avoid. But then also, like, it's learning about yourself, right? Where if you're in a situation where you feel like you're being baited to kind of say something or do something that's out of like your character, really being able to stay true to yourself and not giving into it.
And so what do you do in that situation? Like, do you let your manager know who I mean, I believe I do follow your manager on Twitter. I think you retweeted the podcast stuff, but, like, do you do you
Probably.
do you tell your manager, like, "Hey, man, like, never again," like, you got a list? Or, I mean, or do
Yeah,
you
yeah.
let them deal with your media and all that stuff?
Yeah, well, like usually, like if I'm gonna do an interview or something, I'll run it by him and be like, hey, what it like, you know anything about this guy or like this podcast, and like he'll usually kind of look some stuff up for me, if he's not familiar with it, and like be like, no, no, they're good, you're fine, and like if we have one, he listens to all my interviews, so if we have one where it's like, yeah, we'll be like, yep, nope, nope, not doing that one again.
Yeah, it's crazy because you'll see certain guys where like the fighter's so much bigger than the journalist, which obviously that's the way it is. Fighter's the star, but there's
Hmm.
some you're like, how on earth did that happen? Like, how did you get them? Like, how did you guys do it? And then you watch it and it's not very good. And it's like,
Right.
do you not have a person screening this kind of stuff?
Yeah, I mean, so I think some fighters too, they're just like, hey, yeah, you know what? Like some are willing to talk to, pretty much anyone, and other ones, they're not talking to anyone.
Yeah. I mean, last thing on this though, how do you feel about the interviews during training camps? I'm seeing more and more guys are trying to shut off the media during training camp, maybe
Yep.
taking two, three because you have to promote the fight. But Is it a big distraction during training camp? Like, how does that kind of affect things?
Yeah, for me, I try to do like I'll do a couple like more towards the beginning, but as we're getting like closer to the fight, um, it's usually like slim to none, just because it's your head's in like too many places. At that point you're like really getting down on weight, so it's just like any little extra things sometimes it's just like I can't handle this, I can't
Yeah,
do it. I've had people ask me to do interviews literally like right after weigh-ins or like fight day, and I'm like, no, like you had
yeah.
like 8 weeks to ask me for an interview and you're gonna be like, hey, yeah, let's do it on the day of the fight. No, I'm not doing an interview on the day of the fight.
That's so crazy to me. And I've had guys where they hit me up like, "Hey, our guy just weighed in. Can you talk to him?" And I'm like, well, hold on, like that,
Right.
is his mind really on? I just cut weight. I want to talk to him, and it's like, if I know you and stuff, like, all right, fine, I'll do it. But you
Right.
do think that where it's like, I don't believe his head is going to be on whatever I'm asking him at this point.
I mean, but some fighters do like that. For me, I'm like, nope. I'm like,
Yeah.
don't, nobody talk to me. I'm like, I'm in my room and, I'm in my own space. I'm like, I'll go to eat and that's it. You won't see me until the fight.
Exactly. So you do stuff outside of fighting, or outside of MMA, I should say. I believe
Mm-hmm.
you own your own practice. If I said that correctly, what
Yep.
do you kind of do outside of fighting, outside of MMA, all that good stuff?
Yep. So, I'm actually like a therapist, like mental health. And so like right now, since COVID, it's been very busy on that end of it, which kind of makes my time a little bit even more valuable because I'm on right now I'm mostly on a screen. If I'm not at the gym and I'm not training, I'm working. Because I pretty much wear every hat in my in the business.
Yeah.
I see my clients. I'm a therapist. Then I have to do all the business side of it. I have to deal with the insurance companies. So it's been a lot.
So I have to imagine. I know there's things you can't reveal, stuff like that,
Hmm.
but I imagine you must be seeing with the lockdowns. Obviously, it's been a year and everything. Like, there must be a lot of more people that are depressed, right? Like staying at home, not being able to go out and do stuff.
Yep.
Like, I'm sure you've seen a difference, sort of a shift in sort of your clients and stuff.
Yeah, it's been a huge shift. It's like the anxiety and depression just across the population in general is through the roof. Particularly within like teens. The rates of depression within like my teen population it's grown so much, and it's so sad to see what's kind of happening at such a drastic rate. It's happening. They just across the board. People looking, seeking therapy is more than it's ever been in history. Where it's to the point where there's not enough providers to the level of care that's needed.
So what have you noticed with the teens? Like, what is it that, I hear a lot of people like, oh, it's a social media. It's, your brain wants the likes and stuff like that. But is it necessarily that that's leading to it? Or is it the fact that people are more aware? And it seems like we've got a culture where it's like, talk about it, reach out to people. Like, what's kind of, the cause of it, if you could pinpoint to it?
I mean, I think social media definitely does play a role, right? Because, as adults, it affects us, right? So, of course, it's going to affect a teen where their self confidence and their just sense of self is not really developed yet. And now you're adding in, this whole kind of fake virtual world out there. Um, but then I think it's also too just the quarantine, not being able to kind of really go to school normally, not having normal social interactions, and it's literally a lot over the past year has been just screens for them, right?
Yeah.
Limited social interactions, and then as a teen, home life can be rough, even if you grow up in the best family. It's still, you bump heads with your parents as a teenager. So now it's like, well, now I don't even have an escape. I can't go to school. I can't play these sports I was playing. And like, how do I function? How do I cope?
Do you see a lot of people that have like paranoia with COVID? Like, I feel like, the big joke is everyone's like, if I cough, I don't know if it's COVID and stuff like that. But I assume for you, you must see people that, mentally aren't doing well because they're in their head too much about it.
Oh, absolutely. And especially, my practice is in Queens, so it's within city limits. And New York City was hit. very hard
Yeah.
with COVID. So the level of paranoia, especially towards the beginning, was very real, right? So it's like, how do you battle that when it's something where you're like, no, that's like a real fear. Is this really happening? So it's finding the a balance with it of like, okay, yes, this is real, but this is the reality now. So how do we cope with it? How do we deal, and how do we continue to thrive?
And so, I mean, do you like doing the things on screen? Like, I'm sure it's difficult to sort of get the same connection and stuff. But after doing it for, I assume, a year now, I'm sure you found like a good, effective way of communicating with people, despite the limitations.
I think it's like good and bad. I think it's good in the sense that it literally opened up access to treatment to people that would never reach out, whether it's just because they weren't comfortable, just having time to do it. So I think it's made it a lot more accessible to people because it's, hey, I can do this from the privacy of my home. The downside of it is sometimes it's hard to find that private space, where, hey, if you're talking about something, and even if somebody's in the other room, it can, be a little bit less comfortable. As far as like making connections, I think after, the first couple sessions, I think the connection is pretty equal. It's just that initial session of not being in the same space. But I think a lot of people are preferring it over actually going to an office.
So is there a crossover with your MMA stuff? Like I know, there's a lot of fighters that are also teachers, and I always ask them,
Hmm.
like, are your students aware that you do face punching? But for you, like with your clients, are you someone that you bring up fighting when you can? 'Cause it's like a good analogy, or like, are people aware that they're talking to an MMA fighter as well?
Well, I mean, like, what do you do when you go to like a doctor, right? Especially if you're going to a therapist, you Google them, right?
Right.
So
Yeah,
yeah,
that
so
makes
most of
sense.
most of my clients do Google me, right? So I don't ever bring it up to them, but usually it comes up at some point. Because they're like, it usually comes up in the same where it's like, so, I was like doing some research, and I'm like, you Googled me, didn't you?
Yeah, yeah. It's like
um,
you've got a record with people whose asses you've whooped. Like, what's going on here? What are we doing?
Yeah, and I mean, a lot of my clients now, like, it's to a point where they ask me, like, "Hey, when's your next fight?" They'll watch my fights. So I think it's created like a good relationship, because it allows them to see me as like a real person. Um, and especially like with my teenagers, because it's something that's different, something that they find like usually like, hey, that's pretty cool. So they tend
Yeah.
to be like more open and talk to me, because they're like, oh, you're not someone that's sitting here like in a suit, like, hey, telling me what to do. No, it's more like, hey, wait, oh wait, you do cool stuff. All right, I'll talk to you.
There's got to be some kind of credibility that you get too. Like, this person's an athlete that I'm talking to. This person fights. Like, they must see you in a different light. And not everybody's aware of MMA, which seems weird for us because we're in the bubble. But
Right.
I'm sure there's a lot of people where it's like, holy shit, like this is a cage fighter with the mohawk and the jail tattoos. But it's like, it's really not like that.
Yeah, no, not at all. And I think that's like part of it too, because when they first like find out, they're like, I would have never guessed.
Yeah.
Because like I have like half my head shaved, but like when I'm in like therapist mode, like hair's down, it's all covered up. So it's, they see me in a very different light.
Yeah, that's true. I'm sure, like, say I were to do a session the whole time, it's like, I'm talking to an MMA fighter. Like, I knew you as an MMA fighter first, but for someone else, it's like, hold on, this person doesn't also train to punch people and,
Right,
do jujitsu when, we're not, doing the session.
right. Yeah, I mean, for me, that's my therapy. That's what like keeps like, my balance in my life. And it's like, two very different ends of things. And it's just like, hey, this is what keeps me, in a good headspace.
It's interesting you say that because I'm curious, like, what do you do for your mental health? Because obviously, as a fighter, like, I mean, it's a very stressful thing, right? Like, there's something very primal about going out there and having that adrenaline and knowing that you're about to get into a very violent altercation with someone. I mean, what do you do? Like, because people, I think, assume as a therapist, you look into your mirror and just talk to yourself, but it can't it can't be that simple.
Yeah, no, it's definitely not talking to myself. It's more trying to like make sure like I have like I have my time to like enjoy things, right? Whether it's just like relaxing, hanging out with friends. But a big part for me is training, and working out, and that's like my happy place.
So does that make you more aware of like yourself? Like, say you'd know like the signs, say you're slipping into depression or something. 'Cause not everybody realizes that, right? Sometimes you have someone that tells them. Like, does that make you more aware of like where you are at mentally?
Yeah, it does. It definitely does. Doesn't mean that we can always correct it or fix it, right?
Right, right.
Um, because just because hey, wait, X, Y, and Z equals, A, B, and C, or vice versa, doesn't mean that you can actually put it into place. And a lot of people kind of think that they're like, oh, well, you're a therapist, you know all this. Well,
Yeah.
yeah, well, it's not the same. Like, you look at, you could think of like a personal trainer, right? They can be great at training other people and doing stuff. Doesn't mean that they're, following their own advice. It's very different sides of it.
I think it's kind of like if you were to tell someone, like, would a surgeon, like, if they need surgery, would they operate on themselves or would they
Right,
get somebody else to do it? Like, I don't think anybody would imagine they do it. So that's why it puts you kind of in a weird position too, where it's like, maybe you're aware of it, but like you said, that doesn't necessarily mean you can do something about it.
right. And I mean, I try and just be like, I mean, I'm a pretty like easygoing person, like just in general. So I think that like kind of is my edge because everything is just roll punches. It's like, all right, all right, this is what we're doing. And that's kind of like my motto of life. And I really try and kind of keep to the the thought process of like practice what you preach, right? And like, hey, if I'm, going through, something with one of my clients, and then I have like a similar experience, it's like, all right, well, you kind of you preach this, and this, and that's how you have to handle it. So, try and kind of put it into play for yourself.
I think it's very interesting because fighters, I don't think realize like how different they think mentally, like at least when it comes to the fight, than like a regular person would. Like
Mm-hmm.
Corey Sandhagen, I bring up Joe Rogan again, but I was watching that and he's saying like, "Oh, my family told me don't be too weird, don't give up my thoughts." But it's like, I don't think they realize like, we as a regular person, you might not think that way. You might never have to get yourself to where you're in that headspace. So I'm going to go out there, I'm going to hurt somebody, and it's
Right,
interesting when you hear some guys kind of reveal their thought process, like, "Oh, people think I'm crazy." It's like maybe they do, but for the people that understand what you do, it's like, wow, you do have to be in a different place mentally to, you ignore the anxiety because a lot of people talk about the anxiety they have, but to go out in the cage, they lock it and like, okay, I have to hurt this person, more than they're gonna hurt me. Like it's very interesting when you see the mental side of things and the fact that, people think a certain way to, even just to get in the cage, but they don't realize not everybody sort of sees or even thinks that way.
yeah, oh, absolutely. And I mean that's part of the reason why like most of my most of my friends are fighters, or these people that train, because it's just, it is a different headspace. And mentally it's just you are different. And sometimes it's like a joke. It's like, well, we don't have to hold conversations with people that aren't like fighters or involved in the
Yeah.
industry, because it's like, oh, we're just like a bunch of weirdos.
Have you ever had a conversation like that with, like, say, a regular person not into MMA or something like that, and you say something weird where they're like, "Hold on, what?" Like, I don't know, like, you mentioned that you punched someone or something, and they pause for a second, like, "Hold on, what are you talking about? Am I talking to some kinda psychopath?"
Yeah, yeah. Oh no, 100% all the time. Especially I think like being a female, like people are like, because I never bring it up to people, but like always like somebody will bring it up, be like, oh yeah, she fights, like she does this, and then it's like, oh man, here we go. People are like, what? What, you do that? And then and then ask all the questions, and like you try and like kind of like divert them, and you're like, oh well, this and that, and then then it's like, well, usually the question you get, like, well, like, what does it feel like when you hit someone? It's like, well, it feels really good. Like, I want to break their face. And it's like, what?
Right. Yeah, no, that's what I mean by mentally, like, for you, it makes sense, but for, like, a person on the outside, they're like, "Oh my god, what are you, a serial killer?" It's like, "No, but you mentally have to get to
Right,
a different place. Because if you throw, like, a regular guy chilling into a cage, like, "Go fight this guy," like, hold on, mentally, whether he knows how to fight or not,
right,
mentally, he is not in the right place to try to hurt that person.
right, right. And if they are, then that's
Yeah.
another problem.
Yeah, that's right. That they need to see you for a session. It's like, hold on, man. Like you got some stuff going on up there. Like that's yeah. I mean, I don't want to use the word crazy, but it's like it's definitely something.
Right. Yeah, there's something that's a little concerning.
But so, what's your headspace like before you go into a fight? 'Cause I would feel like you'd have the advantage that maybe you're aware of some stuff mentally, but what are you thinking like before you go into a fight? Like, are you one of these people? Like, are your coaches hyping you up? Are you focusing on your breathing? Like, what's going on in that locker room? Like seconds before you have to make that walk,
I'm usually in like my own space. I'm not someone that likes like, people like, like hyping you up and like that whole thing.
slapping you, all that stuff. Yeah,
Yeah, no, I'm kind of just like I usually like we do our warm up, we do what we got to do, but I'm usually kind of like headphones on, like in my own little, I guess like Zen space, and just kind of like talking to myself and, kind of going through like, all right, this is what you got to do. Time is now. My thought process is kind of like always like losing isn't an option. Like you got to go out there, you got to do everything. You in your power to get your hand raised at the end, but I'm more of somebody that's kind of like just by myself in my own little zone.
a lot of people they mention. You mentioned the zone. Like, there's some fighters that say like when they go in a fight, they're not. I don't know if the word's lucid, but like it's almost like they're having an out of body experience. Some guys like they just watch themselves do it. Other guys, and I was mentioning this about Kevin Holland, where he was talking the whole time. People were like he's not concentrating, and I was like, you know what? Maybe that's his way of
Right.
not going into the zone and keeping himself actually focused because he's not allowing his brain to. It's I don't know how to explain it, but it for me it kind of made sense in that way. But how much of it like do you go into the zone during your fights like that?
I feel like I like I go into like it's kind of more of like that like outer body experience where like you're just on like autopilot type of a thing, and you're
Right.
going and you're doing it, and you don't even kind of know sometimes like what you're doing, and then like afterwards you watch a fight and you're like, what, I did that, oh all right.
Yeah.
And that's where it's like for me it's like really training, right? Like what you train, what you do in the gym, that's what comes out in the fight. um and for me that's really how it's been. It's like once fight time comes, you're going to do what you've been doing.
And we know some fighters they black out naturally, not from a concussion. Like obviously you
Hmm.
get a concussion, you might black out. But how much do you remember? Like say the fight ends, like how much of or 10 minutes later, whatever. How much of it do you remember without having to go back and watch it?
Oh, not much at all.
Yeah.
Yeah, not much at all. Like I have to like go back and watch it and then be like, oh, this is what
Right.
happened, all right.
I feel like
my
even during the
perspective my
like
perspective was
yeah.
very different.
I feel like even the post-fight interviews, like sometimes you guys get questions that are so specific, and it's like, do they necessarily remember throwing that combination? Like, 'cause a lot
Yeah.
of it seems like muscle memory.
No, it's awful. Those
Yeah,
questions are awful. You're like, yeah, wait, I just like, we just did like, let's say it's a 3 round fight, right? We just did 15 minutes going at it. And like now you're gonna ask me some very cerebral questions. Like my
yeah.
brain is not functioning. Like I'm still catching my breath.
Or it's like, what went through your mind when you threw that right hook? It's like nothing. I'm watching myself
I
throw
was
the
trying
hook,
to
and I'm
knock him
thinking,
out.
yeah,
Like
yeah. It,
Uh, yeah, I mean, I think as fighters though, we've developed like for the most part, like you do hear some horrific interviews, and you're like, please stop, please stop talking. Somebody tell him to stop.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
but for the most part, I think we do a pretty good job at like just knowing how to field those type of questions and like navigate your way through.
Or I think the worst one is Overeem, right? When he was talking about the famous, he felt the tap, and then it just you were kind of like, hopefully they brushed past it because we knew he didn't tap, and then Joe just kept egging him on. You're like, oh, this is gonna end so badly, and I have
Right.
no. And then he's like, let's watch the footage. Like, oh my god, my man! Like Overeem was just knocked out, and you want to
Right.
watch the footage with him. Like
Yeah.
that's me watching it. You're like, I don't know what to do in that situation. Like if
Yeah.
you're Overeem,
No, it's just terrible, and you just want to hide.
yeah,
You want to hide for them.
or is it secondhand cringe, right? You're just watching it, and
Yeah.
you're like,
You're like,
oh, this
oh no.
train wreck, no.
You're like, please stop, please stop. Oh,
Oh,
it's still
man.
going.
Yeah. Oh, and I think the worst to me was, "Let's look up at the and rewatch it." I was like, "Oh, no, Joe, like, you" and I think I put on Twitter, I was like, "Joe, you didn't have to do him like that." And
Right.
he responded to it, so my mentions became, insane, but, it just yeah, it's one of those train wrecks that you just watch, like, man, it's such an awful thing.
100%.
So listen, before we wrap up though, obviously I'm gonna let you shout out your social media and
Yep.
all that good stuff. But do you have a lot of people on the street that try to challenge you to fights? Like I feel like the fact that you would be a woman, a lot of people they always like, could as a big 200-pound male, can I beat a woman that knows how to train? Like, is that something you tend to get sometimes?
I get those questions like at like social events, right? Like you know, for example, I was at like a wedding a couple weeks ago, and it was like that was a question. Be like, oh, do you think you could take everybody in this room? Like, you know, like those more of those type of like hypothetical type questions. I get, I never get anyone like that's actually stepping to me and being like, oh, hey, like let's see what you could do.
Yeah.
That would just be totally disrespectful, and
Yeah.
I deal with that in a different way.
So what do you do with a question like that? Like, could you take everyone in the room? I'm sure the competitive side of you is like, I'll take everyone right now and I'll submit every single one of you. But like, how do you answer a question like that without being an ass and without starting, everyone trying to square up?
Well, pretty much exactly like that. I'm like, yeah, absolutely, I could take everyone.
Yeah.
That's usually my response. But I think also being like a smaller female, like you know, I can get away with that type of stuff where people aren't like,
Yeah.
"Oh, really? All right, let's step outside." No, they're just gonna look like an idiot if they do that.
Yeah. Yeah, that definitely wouldn't look good. Listen, we've done an hour here. There's so much to unpack. Like even just the mental health stuff, so interesting. But I always like to finish by letting the guests shout their stuff out. So yeah, I mean, I'm sure you have a bunch of stuff you want to shout out. If you want to shout out your practice, social media, whatever it is, articles, anything, now would be the time.
All right. Well, you guys can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Lionheart Jill. My Facebook's my name, Jillian DeCoursey. I also want to thank my favorite gift maker, Brat, on Twitter. He's always making some pretty sweet gifts. And some of my major sponsors. We got Seek Chick, we got Guard What's Yours, Receptra Naturals, Fighter Elias, Bushido Bags, Swole House Meals, House of Healing, Itza, and Grit Mouth Guards. And my coaches and training partners at Ring Sport Muay Thai and Long Island MMA, and my manager, Jason Adams, with Underdog MMA.
There we go. Well, listen, Jillian, thanks
But
so much for coming on. I really appreciate it. And for anyone that made it to the end, shout out to you because it seems obvious if people watch to the end, but if you made it to the end, shout out. We appreciate it. And we'll see everyone for the next episode.